So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, guys, based on the time zones you all are coming from. So guys, before we start with the session, please give me a quick information, everyone. Perfect. Thank you so much for the confirmation, everyone. So my name is Neeraj Kheria, and I've been working in this IT industry for more than 13 years now. So the main agenda for today's session, we are going to discuss on what exactly a Python is and how it is structured, who uses Python, the features available in Python, and how we can work with data types, operators, flow control, functions, and how we can work with file handling as a part of our discussion in Python. So Python, as we know, in simple layman terms, it's a simple high-level dynamic programming languages, which is a complete, we can say, which doesn't require any kind of compiler. It is self-interpreted. So basically, the father of Python was Van Rossum, so it was developed in 1989. Now, basically, the main goal in creation of Python was to make a programming language that is easy to code, it is easily readable, and it's an open source. And Python is ranked as the third most prominent language, followed by JavaScript and Java, in a survey held in 2018 by Stack Overflow. And it is inspired by the favorite show of Rossum, which was Flying Circus, which was created by Monty Python, and it is an open source tool. That means there are no licensing involved here. It has a large standard library to make use of, so that we don't have to develop things from scratch. It is based on the object-oriented programming structure, same as C and other languages as well. And then it is easier to learn because here we have the programming done in simple plain English without any complicated syntaxes, parentheses, and semicolons to take care of. So if we talk about the features of Python, then Python is currently the most preferred language to work on because of its simplicity, powerful libraries, and the readability as well. So first of all, we had discussed it is simple. That means that there are less amount of syntax. We don't have to worry about the semicolons. We don't have to worry that much on the syntaxes as well. For example, in Java, to print any statement, we have to define print.system.out.println, whereas in Python, it's simple print, and then we have to specify the statement that we want to be printed. It's as simple as that. So the coding becomes much easier, especially for the beginners. It's an open source tool. That means there are no licensing involved here. It's a free language for everyone to use and alter as required. It is portable. That means Python code can be shared and it would work the same way it was intended to. Seamless and hassle-free. That means again we can code on one platform and then we can run it in another platform. There is no platform dependability for running Python. And it is embedded, it is well embedded, and it is also extensible as well. That means Python can have snippets of other languages inside it to perform certain functions. For example, if we want, we can integrate the codes or functions written in C, C++ to be easily embedded into Python so that we can make use of it. And that's exactly is what one of the main features that makes Python powerful. And it is, again, a complete interpreted languages. That means the worries of large memory tasks and other heavy CPU tasks are taken care by Python itself, leaving us to worry only about the coding. That means the entire memory management is handled well in Python by itself. And there are huge amount of libraries for every use case. Like we have NumPy, Matplotlib, scikit-learn, OpenCV. We have Seaborn, we have iteration tools, we have almost for every use case we have a library available. When we say library, that means these are predefined codes, predefined functions that we can directly import into application and get started instead of sitting down and doing the entire coding from scratch. Just like we have jQuery, where we have predefined functions from in JavaScript, so that we can easily import that and then we can get started. And the same thing is applicable to Python as well. And it is object oriented. That means objects help breaking down complex real life problems into such that they can be coded and solved to obtain the solutions. So instead of handling a large solution, one, like I say, completely as a whole, we can break it down into smaller objects, and using that we can ensure the entire security of the application is also intact, and then we can have a well-defined structure in which the code can be created. Now, after discussing about the features of Python, let's get started. Like, who uses Python? So Python is being used by multiple companies in almost every platform that they are working on. It is used by Google as their backend engine. It is used by Dropbox, BitTorrent, the NSA, as in the National Security Agency of USA. It is used in the IoT components of the Raspberry Pi. It is used by NASA, by YouTube, by Netflix. Nowadays, Python is one of the main programming languages which supports the backend of any application because of its portability, because of its less complicated and less complex structure, and then mainly because it is the main language preferred in AI/ML and also in data science, because it has numerous libraries to support these calculations and support these integrations in the AI/ML, right? And that exactly is what we have Python used for. For example, when we are building any solutions for, let's say, face detection, then we have a library called OpenCV for that, which can allow us to help us build a solution much faster and in a much efficient manner as compared to design something from scratch. And that's why Python has been mostly preferred for these different solutions out there. All right, so let's discuss on Python basics. Now, to get started with the Python basics, we need to first of all install Python in our system. And nowadays, Linux and the Unix distributions, they come with the version of Python out of the box. That means we don't have to install Python if we are using the Linux and Unix distributions. Like we have Ubuntu, CentOS, Debian, we can use the Python. We get the Python installed already on the platform without doing any kind of manual installation. And if we are trying to install this for the first time, we can refer to this link here called python.org, and then we can go to download section. Or if we want to use multiple IDEs, then we can also use the IDE as well. We can refer to this link here, python.org/download, and then depending upon which version of Python we want to work with, starting from 2.7 till 3.9, we can choose accordingly. So 3.9 was introduced back on 5th of October itself. Here we go. So we can download the Python, and again here along with Python we also get one default Python CLI that we can use to get started. We can take up that approach. So when you see download Python, we can simply see the Python currently being installed. So suppose if we go to our system, we would be able to simply navigate to Python, and here we can see here we have the Python IDLE already configured that we can use to get started, or we can make use of the IDEs. IDEs refers to integrated development environment. So we can make use of these IDEs to get started as well, depending upon how exactly we want to code, and if we want to have a complete GUI along with the CLI as well for getting to work on these languages, we can do that easily as well. So we can make use of this entire CLI, we can get started, or we can simply use any of the IDs as well to get started. So for example, let's say here we want to start with any kind of configuration here. So we can define, okay, all the configurations, and then we would be able to get the output given to us when we are working with this kind of CLI. So whatever we want to work on, we can define how exactly we want to work here. So basically, in case we want to work with this kind of CLI method, we can do that, or we can make use of the ID. For example, if we want to work with this kind of CLI, we can open up the CLI like we have done. Let's say we take the help of a simple statement. Let's say we try to define x is equal to, suppose, 5, y is equals to 7, and now we want to print. Let's say we want to print what? We want to print x plus y. If we run the statement, then the output based on whatever simple function that we may have created, that is going to be returned to us, like we can see here. All right. So we can use this version of the CLI, or we can simply make use of another tool like we have PyCharm. So if you want to work on PyCharm as one of the most popular IDE refers to Integrated Development Environment, then you can use the IDE as well. So PyCharm is offered in two different versions. If you want to develop on the, let's say if you want to work on other languages as well, along with Python, we want to work on complete integration both with HTML, JS, and SQL, that we can download the professional version, which is offered at a free trial, whereas the community version, where we can work on core Python, that is available for free. So depending upon the system you all are using, so you can choose a system, as PyCharm is available for Linux, Mac, and as well as for the Windows system as well. It is available for all. We can use Anaconda as well, depending upon the preferences. We can choose any of the IDs if you want. We can also work with Jupyter as well. You can also work with Anaconda. So Anaconda is mostly preferred for the, again, for some data science project as well. But again, if you want, we can make use of it. All right. But again, as we know, again, PyCharm is available free of cost, so there are no licensing involved here. And once we are done, we can open up PyCharm. So let's open it up. So once we start PyCharm, we can define, okay, which, if you want to use any of the previous configuration, if you don't want to import any settings, we can simply opt out. And this community version is going to be booted up, where we can start working on a new project altogether. We can do that. So before we discuss further, let's create a new project. So it may take a minute for this one, for that one to be configured. So in the meantime, let's discuss further on our discussion on Python. All right. So here we have discussed how we can install Python by using the python.org as in our official website, or we can make use of any of the IDs as well. So if we talk about the first program with Python, now before we can define Python as we discussed, we can start with a simple program in Python. Let's create a new project. Let's say we name it as Edureka. We can choose any of the IDs as per the requirement. Click on create. So this is going to create a simple project for us. Now here we have Edureka 1 created. So now to get started, we can right click on here, and here we can click on create a new file. Let's say we name it as a simple demo.py. So the extension for Python file is what? py. The extension for working with for any Python file is simply .py. So let's do one thing. Let's increase the font size so that we don't have to strain our eyes. And under editor, we can increase the font size. Let's say we increase it from 13 to, let's say, 24 to make things easier for you all. All right. So as we discussed, we can define, let's suppose, a simple program. Let's say here we have x is equals to 9, and we can define the y that's supposed to be 19. And now we want to print the sum of it. So we can do two things. You can either we can define z, where we can define x plus y, and then we can print here directly z. We can do that. And once we are done, we can simply right click on anywhere on the program ID, and here we can click on run demo. If there are no errors on this particular program, then this is going to run without any problem. But again, if they are, then again, we have to simply make a choice on. All right, so before we discuss further, let's just first of all discuss on data types in Python. So if we talk about the available data types in Python, then there are multiple types available. First of all, we have the dictionary. We have sets, strings, tuples, list, and numeric data set available. So first of all, again, these all are different data types available in Python. Now, basically, when you talk about data types, they are basically data that a language supports, such that it is helpful to define a real life data, such as the e-commerce inventories detail, like we have name of employees, the student data, and so on. The possibilities are endless. The data types again are available in these formats. So first of all, we have numeric. So numeric means again we have numeric data types that are used to store numerical values in the variables. And now numeric data types are not mutable. So when we say not mutable or immutable, that means the now something which is mutable, that means again they can be changed. And if something is immutable, that means once it has been declared, it cannot be changed after that. So we have to take care of that when we are working with any particular IDs as per the or with any particular platform in case or any particular solution that we are going to work with. All right, so let's get started. And then we have list. So list is basically the same arrays. Lists are same like we have arrays. So here we can store multiple items together. Now they can be homogeneous. That means we can create a list containing only numbers or only the alphabets, or we can create a heterogeneous data type available. For example, we can have an integer, we can have a string as well also added, and lists are mutable. That means we can change the list, we can modify the list as per the requirement. We can change it at any point of time we want. And Python and Ruby, again, they are not, they are almost based on the same principle, but again, they are different languages that we are going to discuss as we proceed further. So these all are different data types available in Python. After list, we have tuples, so we can make use of tuples as well to get started. So tuples are what? Tuples are basically the, now they are more or less same as a list, but again, they are not mutable. Now this makes tuples faster than a list because again, once they have been defined, again, they cannot be modified. So here we can have a complete heterogeneous combination consisting of integers and multiple strings as well. So mutable. All right, so there are multiple data types available here. Depending upon the requirement, we can choose what kind of data type we want to work with, and then we can choose the entire output. Just like we have seen earlier, we can make use of simple program as x is equal to 9, y is equal to 19. Now these are what? These are simple integer data types that we had declared. And then we have simply added these two together by using z, and z equals to x plus y, where we have to print the statement, and by for printing any statement, or we can say for printing the output, we have used print command, and then we have specified what exactly we want to be printed as z, and there we got the entire output given to us. So either we can do it this way, or we can define the addition directly as well as an x plus y. And this is going to again, if to run the entire demo, we can simply click on run demo, and same thing is also going to give the same result instead of saving it as simple use case. So you have seen that we can declare numbers by using the same concept as integers here. If we are going to save something as a list, or we can say we are going to save something as an array, then we can define the list as well, like whatever we want to define. So when we define something as a list, we can save it as an array, just like we have array, right? So for example, let's say we are trying to save something as a list here. So we can come back to the ID. Now here earlier we defined numbers. So let's do one thing. Let's say we save something as a list. So we can delete these two statements. Now in here we can define if x is equals to, now for reading a list we can use square brackets, and here each and every value, if we are trying to enter something as a string, then we have to make use of double quotes, right? And there are multiple, and again, when we are working with PyCharm, there are multiple color schemes that we can make use of. We can either use the white scheme or we can use the black scheme as well, depending upon which theme we are comfortable with. So we can define the string value. For example, let's say here we want to store, let's say fruits here, we want to store, let's say flowers. So here we have, suppose, let's say rose. Now we can save something as another value. Suppose here we can define as lily, and we may define something such as, suppose, orchid. So basically here what we are doing, we are simply saving the name of the flower types as a part of the list, as a part of a simple list here. And we can save multiple values by using a simple comma, and then under double quotes, If it is a string, then it has to be in double quotes. If it is a number, then it can be a direct number itself. So for storing numbers, we don't need to have a double quote defined. So we can save this as a complete list. And now let's suppose if we want to print it, we can make use of print. And what we want to print X. We can define print X. Now it doesn't need to be always X. For example, here we can name it as, suppose, flowers. It can be any name that you want to give here. Suppose here we want, now here we would like to print flowers altogether. So depending upon what kind of statement, what kind of variable we are saved, we can choose the statement accordingly. And now if we want to execute this, we can again run it and we would be able to see the same output has been given, rose, lily, orchid, which has been declared, which has been saved as a list. And now if we want to print the type of data, so we can again make use of print, and then we can define the type of what? Type of the flowers that we have used. So if we run this statement, run demo, so we can see the flowers have been returned, the array has been returned here. And then we can see the type of flowers, as in class has been declared returned as a list. It has been returned as a list here. Same way when we are saving something as a tuple. Let's say we are saving something as a tuple. Then for tuple, we don't use the square brackets. We don't use the square brackets. For tuples, we make use of a normal bracket. So here we can remove the square brackets with simple normal brackets, and here we can define the variables. It can be string, it can be numbers. And now if we read on the same demo, we can see it has been returned, and plus now the class has been changed from list to tuples. And we can change the type of tuple as and when required. We can modify it as and when required. We can easily do that. Depending upon the configuration, we can change the tuples. And let's suppose here we want to print. Now, when we are working with the list, for example, when we are working with the list here, so let's say if we, now earlier we had printed the entire list, correct? Earlier we had printed the entire list. Now we want to print only one particular item from the list. So what we can do, we can define the list item as a part of the index value. So when we are saving something as a part of the index value itself, what we can do for printing a specific number from the given list, we have to specify the index value. Now, when we are saving something as a list, the list always starts from the 0th block. Then the second value is stored on the first block, then on second block, third block, fourth block, and so on, as per the configuration defined. So here, if we store something, now we want to return, let's say, orchid. Let's say here we want to display only orchid, nothing else. So what kind of value we have to define here? It has to be true, because now the value here starts from 0. So now to print orchids, it has to be 0, first and second, and it has to be 2. So now if we rerun it, we can see now only the value which has been stored in the second block has been returned to us as a part of the response. And we can do multiple things with the list as well. For example, let's say we want to return to a complete range as well. For example, let's suppose here we have multiple other items available. We have multiple other items available. For example, let's say we have sunflowers, we have tulips. Let's say here we add 2 more data sets. Let's suppose here we add tulips. We add, suppose, sunflower. We add China rose. So we may have different lists available. Now, suppose here we want to return from a given range here. For example, let's say here we want to return from, let's say, from 2nd till 5th. So we can define a complete range, and now whatever data is available in the given range, that is going to be returned to us. So as you can see, from 2nd to 5th, orchid, tulips, and sunflower, these are available, and that's why these 3 values have been returned to us as a part of the range that we defined here. As a part of range that we had defined here. So that's how we can work with the list items here. Same way we have dictionaries. So dictionaries are basically used to define the key value pairs, that we can define a key and then we can define the value for it accordingly. So for example, let's say if you want to define something as a key value here, then we can make use of the dictionary type. So let's do one thing. For doing this, we can come back to our Cloud Lab. So here we can, let's say here we want to define a simple value. So let's do one thing. Let's say we clear this out. Now in terms of flowers, we can define a complete value. Let's say here we can define the brand. Now under brand, we can define, let's say, flowers or name. Or let's say we can't be creative much with flowers here. So let's do one thing. Let's change this to cars. So here we can define cars. And the cars, we can define the brand. Let's suppose here we define the brand. Now the brand can be supposed as Mercedes. And here we can define the model. Let's suppose model can be here defined as SLA, AMG. When we are defining multiple values, we have to separate them by a simple comma as well. And then we can define the year as well. Suppose the year of manufacturer. Suppose here we have the current model. Now, when we are defining any year and numerical value, we don't have to define the double quotes. And here, let's say we want to print it, then here we can define print, and here we can define this. Or since we are using simple car section, here we can define print cars. And then this is going to print the entire statement for us. All right, so here once we run this entire statement here, we can simply run the demo, and here we can see all the options are going to be done as brand, Mercedes, model, SLA, and the year which we have saved as a part of the dictionary. And then if you want to refer to just one particular value, for example, let's say here we want to refer only one value or for whatever we have defined. For example, let's say here we can define a value. So suppose here we want to define the model. And here, there's no confuse here. So suppose here we define the parameter as A. And under A, we have defined we want to store cars and we want to get the value which has been stored under, let's say, model. We want to be from the cars section here. We want to get the data. We want to, from the cars variable that we declared here, we want to get what? We want to get the data, the value stored under model. So here we can define model, and now we can print A. So A is going to be print what? A is simply going to get the model value from the cars, and then it is going to return it as a response. So if we run this current statement here, we can see the value for model has been returned to us. All right. And then we have strings. So strings is what we have seen. We can define a complete string section here, and then we can return the string as per the requirement. Like we have been returning the string as print, and the value of this in this is what we are going to enter here. So these all are different data types available by default under Python. All right. And then we have functions. Now we also have multiple operators. So depending upon the use case, we can define the usage of operators accordingly. Let's say if we are working on any operators that we have discussed, if we define x is equal, suppose 99, and y is equals to, let's suppose 77. And now we can perform multiple operations. Let's suppose here we can define x plus y. We can define x plus y. So now if we run this again here, the addition is going to happen. We can make use of subtractor as well, where we can have the entire subtraction done. We can also multiply these two together by using the asterisk. We can run operations as in we can divide them together as well. So basically this is going to return the entire, now we can find the modulus, we can run multiple operators as per the requirement, So we can compare as well as a part of operators available. We can compare them together depending upon the requirement. That means how exactly one value compares to the other. And we can also club it with multiple. We can compare with multiple values as well. So as we have been discussing on the entire concept for different data types. Now we also have the conditional. We have the entire conditional statement that we can make use of. So conditional statements in Python are if-else statements. So basically we now using the conditional statements, we can check for a condition. If that condition is true, then we can execute a given statement.
or if it is not true, then the other statements can be executed. A simple example is, let's say if we go back to our ID, let's say here we define two values. Let's say here define x is equal to 5 and we define y is equal to suppose 9. And now we want to check if x is, let's suppose, if x is less than y, then it should run a given statement. So here we can define print, and here we can run a statement such as, suppose if x is greater than y, or suppose it's less than y, not greater than. If x is less than y, then it should simply print the given statement. Now, if we want, we can run this. So basically here we define the operator as well. As we can see, x is less than, x is equal to 5, and which is definitely less than 9. So here that this statement is going to be printed, correct? But suppose if we define this as 50, and now if we run this up, as you can see, no statement is going to be printed because we haven't defined what should happen if this condition is not met. We haven't defined what should happen if this condition is not met. So we can define the other condition as well. For example, if one condition is not fulfilled, then we can check for another condition as well. For example, let's say if we want, we can simply execute one another statement. Suppose if this is not true, then else it should do what? It should simply, let's say, print x is greater than y. We can define another statement. If this is not true, then again the other statement should be printed. And as you can see here, if this condition is not true, then the other statement has been printed, or we can say other statement has been executed, correct? And then if we want to check for multiple conditions, then we can simply make use of else if. For example, here we want to check multiple conditions. So here we can define elif, and here we can define the condition. Suppose elif is basically used to define one more condition. So here we can define condition, let's say if x is less than y, then print this one. Else if x is, let's suppose if x is equals to, suppose 50, equals to 50, then it should simply print x is 50. And then we can also define if both the conditions are not true, then it is going to print x is greater than y. We can have three conditions defined here. If x is less than, else if, and n. Then if both the conditions are not true, then it is going to run the third statement. Now we can see x is definitely equals to 50. That means here the second statement has been executed. And now let's say if we increase this, for example, let's say if we increase this to 500 and we rerun the entire demo, we can see now both the conditions are not true, and then we have seen the other condition as x is equal to, also can say x is greater than y. So that's how we can work with these different conditional statements as per the requirement. And there we can also work with the loop statement as well, where we can run the statement until unless one condition is defined. And we can create multiple functions that we can make use of the built-in functions, or we can make use of the other functions as per the requirement. All right, so I guess since it's almost time now, so let's say we wrap it up for today, guys. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.